So we're starting Parshat Vayigash. Let's see.
274.
We're on page 274. Is it just last week that we missed?
Yeah.
The week before, just last
3
week.
weeks.
So, what?
We
Was it
missed
3
3
weeks? 3 weeks.
weeks.
That's because I was away.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I was away.
We did not meet without you.
What's that?
We
You
did
didn't
not
meet
meet without
I know. My other class wants to. They're like, next time you go away, can you find somebody else to? Right. Okay, that's right. So we missed a few. We're up to the middle of the Joseph story, or actually near the tail end of the Joseph story. The brothers have come down to Egypt. He has planted a cup in Benjamin's sack, right? As we know from the movie or play. And now Judah comes forward to plead the case for Benjamin. George, you want to start us off?
Then Judah went up to him and said, Please, my lord, let your servant appeal to my lord, and do not be impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Pharaoh. My lord asked his servants, Have you a father or another brother? We told my lord, We have an old father, and there is a child of his old age, the youngest. His full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother, and his father dotes on him. Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me, that I may set eyes on him. We said to my lord, The boy cannot leave his father. If he were to leave him, his father would die. But you said to your servants, Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, do not let me see your faces. When we came back to your servant, my father, we reported my lord's words to him.
And so step one is, it's your fault, Joseph, right? They didn't call him Joseph, right? They still don't know who he is. Second in command person who's going to give us some grain. But you're the one who sort of through your line of questioning, is your father alive? Do you have any more sons or brothers? And bring him down to me. Don't come back unless you bring him here, right? So if it weren't for you, Benjamin wouldn't even be here, right? Benjamin certainly wouldn't be in this situation. Okay, go on.
Later our father said, Go back and procure some food for us. We answered, We cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us can we go down, for we may not show our faces to the man unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, As you know, my wife bore me 2 sons, but one is gone from me. And I said, Alas, he was torn by a beast, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and he meets with disaster, you will send my white head down to Sheol in sorrow. That's what David said when he was dying. Now, if I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his own life is so bound up with his, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will send the white head of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in grief. Now your servant has pledged himself for the boy to my father, saying, If I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. Therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father unless the boy is with me? Let me not be a witness to the woe that would overtake my father.
But who does it seem that Judah is most concerned about? His father, right? I think that a lot of times we think, like Joseph sees that the brothers have changed, and a lot of times that's thinking that now they are not as jealous of the favored son, right, of Benjamin, or at least they're sticking up for him in this case. But it seems like it's maybe a little bit more that maybe they're more concerned about their father than they were back when they sold Joseph off in the first place. So it's still a change, still a development of the brothers, or at least of Judah, but not necessarily in respect to the relationship amongst the brothers. Like they still might, hate Benjamin's guts. We don't really know. We don't really know from this piece. Okay, Len, go on. 45.
Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone withdraw from me." So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. His sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear, and so the news reached Pharaoh's palace.
So why does he have everybody leave if he's going to be so loud that everybody hears anyway?
Well, he didn't intend for them to hear.
Maybe they didn't intend for them to hear, right? I'm not sure.
This is the part that bothers me more than anything else, this next paragraph.
The next paragraph? Okay.
Joseph has been premier of Egypt, whatever it is, for many years evidently.
Right.
He didn't bother to go up 100 miles to see if his father was all right.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, that bothers me.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, right? Why doesn't Joseph go?
Yeah.
And maybe there's a piece of him that says that, well, here I am, sort of lucked into this position. I don't want to push things a little bit too far, right? If I start saying, oh, let me go back and reconnect with my family, well, then Pharaoh might not, right, want me in this position. He might, and so forth. So there's.
But it just bothers me that.
Yeah, no, I think so, right? And we could think about that in terms of other family dynamics, right? And what does it take for one family member to take the steps to reunite with another family member after an estrangement, after time's away? How difficult is it to take that first step? So there's sort of a sociological and psychological reading of it.
Wasn't he in jail? And it never explains how long he was in jail for.
Yeah, it's only a couple of years, right? That he's in jail, or at least the time between going down to Egypt. He goes down to Egypt at like 17, and I think he gets the position. He's before Pharaoh to interpret the dreams when he's about 20. So it's only a couple of years.
I never knew how long.
But then you've got the famine, right? Some of the text that we're going to look at is going to look at some of the timing of it, and it could be that so you've got at least the 7 years of good, right?
He was kind of in charge of collecting the.
Right. So that's so that makes 9 or 10 years, and then they may have been somewhere in around the 5th year of the famine. So that would be about 14 years before
It might have
they.
really been too hard, and maybe he felt like he didn't want to approach his family because they tried to kill him.
Right. That's what's there to go back to, right? What's there to go back to when, right? I mean, certainly his father, right? And that's the question.
You don't know about that. Often, someone who is so favored doesn't return the same level of attachment. He may just
Father.
to his father.
Right.
His father may have been much more attached to him than he was to his father.
Right, but
Or
also he might have been oblivious in some ways to his brother's jealousy as well, right? I think
What clearly was
somebody
in the
that,
early
right?
story.
Well, after they threw him in a pit, he couldn't
But
have
that's-
been oblivious.
that's
So
true.
they
Well,
felt
something was wrong.
Yeah.
Right, at that point.
Yeah,
no,
he
they
was
had
this
a-
smart. I
They were
think.
talking about killing him, and instead they threw him in a pit.
Right.
One of the other things is Joseph may very well be very resentful that his father never came searching for him. I mean,
Well,
he
doesn't-
wouldn't
yeah,
know.
He doesn't know
that-
the story that was told.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
here he is disappearing, and his
But-
father isn't searching for him. His father never finds him.
There's a lot of
So,
angles.
there are a lot of
There's a lot of
ways.
different ways to look at
And
it.
to bring it
Really.
back.
Yeah,
White coat or
that's
something like
that's
that.
right at
But
this
Joseph
point.
is not going to know that, is
Yeah.
he?
Maybe in those days it wouldn't go searching
It's
for
rich.
the corpse.
It's rich. There's a lot
Well,
of
no,
different
well,
ways to think about it.
Or also, he's an outsider. I mean, here's a guy in Egypt who came from if you'll pardon the expression, God knows where.
Mhm.
And he's taken over number 2 position.
Right.
And the guy who was number 2 may not like him. And so they very well may resent that here this person who just came out of prison has taken over, and at least for 14 years
Right.
has had this very high position. So he may be very jealous of where he is, and he may not want to rock the boat.
Yeah, no, I can. That's my first thought about it.
Yeah.
Right?
And particularly given Egypt has a very, very strong priesthood. You know, the people who run the temples have a lot of money, they have a lot of power. They have essentially overthrown pharaohs.
Well,
So if this man is not worshiping any of their gods, yeah, he's pretty vulnerable. So I think that business
yeah.
about not angering other
Right.
people is a pretty strong
well,
argument.
also they're very xenophobic. And not being Egyptian is a real minus with all the palace intrigue. His position probably is in danger.
And then by this time, he may also feel himself that he doesn't want to advertise the fact that he comes from these ignorant peasants from the wilderness.
Right.
Yeah, don't
Right.
forget-
He's passing at this
Yeah.
point. Right.
He
He's
tries
passing.
to
Wrong side
instruct
of
his
the
brothers
tracks.
what to say,
Exactly. Right.
and they're introduced and they
Yep.
don't do it right. So.
Right. Right. When
So he
when
was
they come
concerned.
down, he tries to get them to pass as well on some
Yeah.
level. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Thank you, Neil, for bringing that up. Okay. And we're now going to
Still
see.
don't like him.
What's that? What'd you say?
I said I still don't like him.
I know. It's great. I think that part of the richness of the stories here is the fallibility of our characters. Right?
Yes, I agree with that.
And it's one of the things, and also even like we come out of slavery, that we're a small people. If somebody were really writing something about this great tradition, they would have put us in a much better light in some ways. But I think that there's real richness in the fact that it's not all just rosy.
Yeah, I once read someplace that one of the differences between the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the Old Testament, just what you said, people are people. They have good traits and bad. In the New Testament, they have no bad traits. There's not a single bad trait of anybody in the New Testament. Now, I've never read the New Testament.
I don't know well enough
That
to
was-
say,
I
but
heard a guy say that.
it's interesting. Okay, Len, go on.
Okay. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still well? But his brothers could not answer him. So dumbfounded were they on account of him.
Earlier on, when they were going to throw him in the pit, it said that they could not speak I don't know, it's basically something like they could not speak a word to him, right? And here again, right, they can't speak a word to him. Before it was because they disliked him so much, and now it's just out of shock. Go ahead.
Then Joseph said to his brothers, come forward to me. And when they came forward, he said, I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. It is now 2 years that there has been famine in the land, and there are still 5 years to come in which there shall be no yield from tilling. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over the whole land of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You will dwell in the region of Goshen, where you will be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that is yours. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, that you and your household and all that is yours may not suffer want. You can see for yourselves and my brother Benjamin for himself that it is indeed I who am speaking to you, and you must tell my father everything about my high station in Egypt and all that you have seen, and bring my father here with all speed." With that he embraced his brothers, Benjamin around his neck, and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Only then were his brothers able to talk to him.
Okay, so here's the reuniting, right? And as with most other places, there's probably additional details that aren't in here. You'd think that maybe they, it's sort of like when someone's trying to claim a lost object, that you have to give a lot of proof as to, that you're really the owner, right? And you probably had to tell, stories like, oh, remember when we did this, or whatever, other things that would really help the brothers recognize that he, in fact, was their brother, was Joseph. I mean, minimally, his statements of you sending me down here and that's one piece of it, but I think that there probably were other conversations going on to really really express the point.
Well, we can tell by his personality, he's still the same Joseph.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
He says,
I'm
"Go
very
to-"
important.
Yeah.
I was selected for
Yeah.
this
And
high
but he
position.
he also says, "Go tell my father." He doesn't
Yeah.
say, "Go tell our father."
Our Father.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's still that little bit of.
He also relates to the fact that he has heard from God directly. He certainly didn't get the God part of it from the Egyptians. So there were no other Jews around, no other Hebrews. So
Right.
He must have got it directly from God in another dream or something.
Well, he certainly sees the ability to interpret the dreams in the latter stages, not necessarily in the stories with the his dreams earlier on, but where he interprets the butler, the bakers, and Pharaoh's dreams, he attributes all of that to God. We don't know, we don't see in the text where he gets that from, right? Is it just internal? Is it more of a prophecy that God speaks to him? That we don't have that. There's no conversation going on here between Joseph and God. We had a lot of that with Abraham. And with Jacob, he speaks to God, but here with Joseph, it's Joseph speaking about God, but not directly to God. So we don't really know where it's coming from, but he certainly attributes his abilities to something divine. Let's see some text here about the reunification from the Kedushat Levi, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, from the mid to late 18th century. Edith, you want to read text 1?
Okay. Genesis 45:12. And behold, your own eyes can see as well as the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that is speaking to you. My sainted teacher, the Tzaddik Rabbi Dov Baer, say that just a light and darkness exist in the universe.
That is, the opposites live side by
So
side.
there is light and darkness within each human intellect. I believe that what he had in mind was that when words are here emanating from the mouth of a tzaddik, the intellect to whom they are addressed undergoes a refinement, and the eyes of the person concerned light up. This is what Joseph referred to when he said to his brother, "Here your eyes, see that my mouth is speaking to you."
Right? So he's picking on this idea, he's looking at this idea, this question, like, it's a strange phrase to see your eyes, right? Your eyes see that my mouth is speaking to you, right? In some ways, it's like you'd say, like, well, you heard it with your own ears, right? So why are the eyes involved in this, right? And so he's saying that when somebody in the level of a tzaddik, of a righteous person is speaking, that it lights up the eyes of the person that's hearing them. And the additional piece that he adds into it is that they undergo some refinement, right? That Joseph speaking to them is also helping the brothers as well.
I'm gonna change the subject just a little bit.
Okay.
Dobert,
Uh-huh.
that's my son's name.
Oh, yeah, right.
But he was named after my wife's grandfather. But Dobert was one of the followers of the Baal Shem Tov, wasn't he?
Yeah, right. So there's a lot of connections and lineage here in the Hasidic communities. Yeah, and certainly nowadays that you go to different Chabad families, and a lot of the children are named the same thing. You've got Dov Bears and you've got Chayamushkas and those things because they're named after the ancestors.
We got a Dov Bear.
But you got a Dov Bear. There you go. Menachem Mendel, all those come up a lot. So Kedusha Levi's, looking here and in conjunction with his teacher, that this idea of light and darkness amongst everybody, right? That each one of us has a little bit of both of those, or not maybe a little bit, has varying percentages, if you will, within us, right, of light and darkness. And the ideal is with the tzaddik, righteous person, has certainly much more. I wouldn't say all, right, but much more in the realm of light than in darkness, which also affects the eyes, right, in some way. And so this idea of the eyes seeing Joseph speaking is brought out there. Okay, haven't gotten to the next one yet, so great. George, you want to continue? In the text, we are on 278, verse 16.
16?
16. 3 lines down from the top.
The news reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph's brothers have come. Pharaoh and his courtier were pleased, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Say to your brothers, do as follows. Load up your beasts and go at once to the land of Canaan. Take your father, your households, and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall live off the fat of the land. And you are bidden to add to as follows: take from the land of Egypt wagons for your children, your wives, and bring your father here. And never mind your belonging, for the best of all the land of Egypt shall be yours." Well, I cannot not figure that. Why would he give all? Pharaoh is talking of a stranger.
Pharaoh's talking to Joseph as a stranger?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it, going back to our conversation before, and why Joseph didn't go back to his father. And I had mentioned, well, because here he doesn't want to make waves or whatever else. But you got to think that during this time, that they'd have some sort of conversations, right? Pharaoh would be somewhat inquisitive. Where'd you come from, right? Well, tell me your story. And it seems like he knows it here. We don't know when it came up, but Pharaoh knows that they're from Canaan, right? Go to your father in Canaan. That these are your brothers. So there's got to be some further relationship that's formed between Pharaoh and Joseph over the time. And so maybe there had been a piece of Pharaoh, right, wanting to say, at different points, go to your parent, go to your father, right? Go back to your family, find them, but we don't. It's all what's called more bibliodrama, right? That we could do, right? We could look at this and really think about it. What were the stories that aren't told here but have happened, and you know, and really get some different understanding.
Could the Pharaoh have had any memory of the sojourn of Abraham there just a few generations before that happened?
Mm-hmm.
That story had been passed down, and he might have made a connection from Joseph to this other story.
Could very well be, right? Right. That's certainly, you know, we at least idealize and imagine that that in these dynasties there was one, great record keeping, right, and two, they would read about what happened to their predecessors, right? What happened to their ancestors, and maybe the Pharaoh knew about the stories with Abraham earlier on. Yeah, that puts an interesting twist on it as well.
Great record keeping, but no record of the Jews having been there. Right?
Well, that's the question, right? None that we can find,
That's
right? None that we find at this point. That's okay.
I think it's interesting that the Egyptians generally are not favorably inclined to be nice to foreigners.
Right.
And here Pharaoh's going all out for Joseph's relatives.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found peculiar was a couple paragraphs ago, Joseph says to his brothers, "I'm like a father to Pharaoh,"
Mm-hmm.
which struck me as very odd. But Pharaoh's just trying very hard to do things to please Joseph,
Right.
which is a very strange relationship.
Right, I think,
Not
well,
what I'd expect.
right, I mean, in one way, when we say that, right, I'm like a father to Pharaoh, a father is supposed to be the one to support and to supply, right, nourishment and what's needed to the family. And basically, Joseph's done that for Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh couldn't do that on his own.
Yeah, I was thinking the timing is also interesting because they're 2 years into the famine.
Right.
So it is now evident to Pharaoh that his political position has been saved. The country of Egypt has been saved by the fact that Joseph was right. So even if he's somewhat skeptical during all the years of plenty, 2 years into the famine, this is the man who allowed him to keep his throne.
Right, yeah.
That makes a big difference.
Right.
Good point.
Right, yeah, when in times of distress in these times, right, who are they gonna blame is the
Pharaoh.
the Pharaoh, the leader, and there'll be a lot more insurgency, uprising, if they had people that were starving in the streets. Yeah, yep.
But of course, at that point, he has to trust that the rest of the prediction is going to come true, that the famine will end. And that would take a lot of faith, I
Right,
suppose.
right, there certainly is faith that's involved. Okay, George, go on.
The sons of Israel did so. Joseph gave them wagons as Pharaoh had commanded, and he supplied them with provisions for the journey. To each of them, moreover, he gave a change of clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and several changes of clothing. And to his father he sent the following: 10 he-asses laden with the best things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with grain, bread, and provisions for his father on the journey. As he sent his brothers off on their way, he told them, "Do not be quarrelsome." It's a characteristic of this bunch of boys.
Yeah, he knows them. He knows them well, right? Go ahead.
They went up from Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. And they told him, "Joseph is still alive. Yes, he's a ruler over the whole land of Egypt." His heart went numb, for he did not believe them. But when they recounted all that Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to transport him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. "Enough," said Israel. "My son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die."
Great. So the brothers come back and they tell Jacob, and that this is where the whole family is going to now transition down to Egypt. But that line, "Do not be quarrelsome on the way," like we said, like we all laughed about it, and he really knows his brothers. But it's interesting. The texts look at it in interesting ways. Almost everywhere, when the translation comes out, it goes with this "do not be quarrelsome." But Rashi looks at it different. If you look at the source sheet, Howard, you want to read source number 2?
Be not agitated by the way. Do not busy yourselves with halachic discussions, lest the road become unsteady for you, lest you lose your way. Another explanation is, do not take very long steps and enter the town where you will stay overnight while the sun is still shining.
It's strange, right? He's looking at this in 2 different ways, right? Don't be agitated. Don't have these sort of halachic conversations the question whether it's lest the road become unsteady or you lose your way. Like, pay attention to what you're doing, is what he's saying. And the other is don't travel at an appropriate pace that that you'll not waste time by getting to a town too early and then just sort of having to spend a few hours before it's actually time to rest and go to sleep. So it's in some ways it's I don't think either one for me very very satisfying as to why they would be agitated by those things. But then he goes on. Go ahead, Howard.
According to the plain sense of the verse, however,
Which it never is when Rashi says it's the plain sense of the verse.
it must be explained thus. Because they felt ashamed, he feared that they might quarrel on the way about his having been sold, arguing one with another. One would say it was through you that he was sold. Another, it was you who made the slanderous statements about him and caused us to hate him.
Okay. So it does seem like the translation is coming from that second part of Rashi, right? Even though Rashi originally just says don't be agitated, the translation certainly comes from this idea of quarreling. And why would they be quarreling? He points out that there's this, the brothers are going to be pointing fingers once they've left him. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. You wanted to do this, and sort of replaying and rehashing things. The Dad Zikanim in the next text takes it a little bit further. Go ahead, Howard.
Do not fear any danger on the way, as I have complete control of the region. The root, Ragaz, Resh Gimel Zayin, is used here in the same sense as in Psalms 4.5. Tremble and do not sin anymore. We also encounter it in this sense in Deuteronomy, etc., which the Targum renders as a fearful heart.
Right. So in some ways, Dr. Kanim is looking at the earlier part of Rashi. Don't be agitated, right? And saying, well, what would they have to be agitated about? Maybe they're afraid on their journey back, especially now that Joseph has given them all of this, all these gifts, right? They're going to now travel back through desolate areas, through places of people also suffering the famine, and the brothers might be a little bit nervous that they'd get attacked. And Joseph's saying, no, don't worry about it. I control this whole area, right? I'm going to put the word out that no one should touch you, right, on this journey. And so that's where he says that Joseph's saying, don't be agitated, don't be worried on this part of your journey. It is interesting that we go back into the Torah text that Joseph says, or the brothers say, he is ruler over all of Egypt. And that goes back to what we said before, where Joseph says, I'm like Pharaoh's father. Here, the brothers also give the sense that he's the one in control. Right? He's ruling Egypt. He's certainly controlling the purse strings, if nothing else. Okay, and then the next text, number 4, in the handout is about Jacob's reaction. Susan, do you want to read?
My son Joseph is still alive. These words, though apparently unnecessary, reflected Yaakov's joy that his son, after these 22 years of being alone in Egypt, had remained true to his tradition and the teachings of his father. In spite of his having been exposed during all these years to every perversion known to mankind, he had remained a tzaddik. The word
Ode.
ode in this verse emphasizes that the cultural influence exuded by the Egyptian society, though powerful, was relatively secondary, peripheral, and also ran seeing that Joseph had absorbed the largest that originated from God in heaven, a predominant and more powerful influence.
So he's looking at the language in verse 28. Vayomer Yisrael Rav Od Yosef B'ni Chai, right? That my son Joseph is still alive. Could have just said Yosef B'ni Chai, right? Joseph, my son, is alive. So why is this idea of he's still alive? Because Shalev is pointing out that Joseph's not just physically alive, but has retained his tzaddikness, right? His righteousness, even amongst the living in Egypt, right? Knowing the cultural differences, he's remained true to his tradition. And so Joseph being alive is not just a physical state, but a spiritual one as well. Great, chapter 46, Jessica.
Okay, so Israel set out with all that was his, and he came to Beersheba, where he offered sacrifices to God of his father Isaac. God called to Israel in a vision by night. Jacob, Jacob, he answered. Here. And he said, I am God, the God of your father. Fear not to go down to Egypt, for I will make you there into a great nation. Myself I will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will also bring you back. Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel put their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to transport them, and he took along their livestock and the wealth that they had amassed in the land of Canaan. Thus Jacob and all his offspring with him came to Egypt, and brought with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons, his daughters, his granddaughters, all his offspring.
So it's interesting, just a quick pause. Before, it was Pharaoh who was saying to the brothers, right, go get the rest of your family, bring them down, never mind your belongings, right? And yet here, they're at least bringing the livestock and the wealth that they had amassed in Canaan. So whether livestock's not considered belongings, or what's the wealth that they're talking about, they certainly don't seem to follow it in an exact way. And maybe there's a desire to, or a fear that they won't really get the support that Pharaoh is promising at that point, and they want to bring with them their own stuff. Okay, go on.
These are the names of the Israelites, Jacob and his descendants who came to Egypt. Jacob's firstborn, Reuven. Reuven's sons, Enoch, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Simeon's sons, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Yachin, Zohar, and Saul, the son of a Canaanite woman. And Levi's sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Judah's sons, Er, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But Er and Onan had died in the land of Canaan, and Perez's sons were Herzon and Hamul. Issachar's sons, Tola, Puvah, Eob, and Shimron, and Zebulun's sons, Sered, Elon, Jaleel. Those were the sons whom Leah bore to Jacob in Padan Aram, in addition to his daughter Dinah. Persons in all, male and female, 33. Gad's sons, Ziphion, Haggai, Shuni, Etzbon, Eri, Arodi, and Ereli. Asher's sons, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah. Their sister Sarah. Beriah's sons, Hever and Malchiel. These were the descendants of Zilpah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Leah. These she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Jacob's wife Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. To Joseph were born in the land of Egypt Manasseh and Ephraim, who Aseneth, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Benjamin's sons, Bela, Becher, Ashbal, Gira, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mupim, Hupim, and
It's an
Ard.
active kid.
These were the descendants of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. Dan's son, Hushim. Naphtali's sons, Yazil, Buni, Jezer, and Shillam. These were the descendants of Bilhah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Rachel. These she bore to Jacob, 7 persons in all. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his own issue, aside from the wives of Jacob's sons, all these persons numbered 66. And Joseph's sons who were born to him in Egypt were 2 in number. Thus the total of Jacob's household who came to Egypt was 70 persons.
Okay, so here we have a bit of the lineage. Certainly, especially after our speaker on Sunday morning at the Sisterhood event, wanting to give voice to the female individuals that are named or not named within this section. It's interesting at the end where it says everybody who came to Egypt except for the wives of Jacob's sons, right? They don't get mentioned at all. So it's got to be that each one of these boys has at least one wife that's having these children. It could be that they have even more wives, so it's more than 70 people. Plus there, statistically, there's going to be just as many daughters as there are sons born. So we'd expect there to be more in that level as well. We get a couple of, yeah.
Why did they mention 2 daughters and not all?
Right. I think that they mentioned 2 of them because they come up in other places, right? Well, Dinah we've already had, and Sarah, I'm not sure if she comes up in the text again. I have to see. But she certainly comes up in the Midrash later on. Serach, the daughter of Asher, Serach bat Asher, midrashically is a woman who was still alive when the Israelites are leaving Egypt, and she's the one who shows Moses where Joseph's bones are, right?
Yes.
That when they're going to leave and they want to take Joseph's bones with them, Serach bat Asher knows that tradition. She was there at the time, and she's mentioned again. Whether I'd have to go see where else she's mentioned biblically, but at least midrashically. So that's probably the reason, right? Because we know about them, so not to mention them would seem out of place. And we wonder, where did they come from? But there's all these other daughters probably that aren't mentioned. So we wanted to mention them and give voice to them as well. And we could go and see if there's any that show up in other midrashim. But 2, we could come up with our own midrashim about some of the daughters of Jacob, the daughters of both Jacob and of Jacob's children. And it also is interesting that in the first grouping, right, which are the children of Dinah, the children of Leah, it says persons in all, male and female, 33, right? And then the next time, where it does mention a woman, right? Serach is in the next grouping. It just says she bore to Jacob 16 people. It doesn't say male and female. And then in the next two, it also just says 14 people in all, or 7 people in all. It doesn't, in the same way, say male and female. So it's an interesting thing that's in one of the. Usually, you have a lot of parallel when you're going through the lineages, but here there's a really distinct difference in the way that it closes up. So that would be another thing to explore a little bit. Great. 70 people. And 70 is of course a nice round number, and we love round numbers in Judaism. And a lot of times there are multiples of other numbers that we like. So 70 is a multiple of 7 and 10. And 7 we've got in a lot of different places, and 10s we have, whether they be 10 Commandments or other 10s. So both of those are solid numbers in Judaism that you end up with, again, multiples of later on. Great. Neil, top of page 283.
He had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to point the way before him to Goshen. So when they came to the region of Goshen, Joseph ordered his chariot and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. He presented him to him and embraced him around the neck. He wept on his neck and a good while. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Now I can die, having seen for myself that you are still alive." Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell the news to Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds. They have already been breeders of livestock, and they have brought with them their flocks and herds and all that is theirs. So when Pharaoh summons you and asks, 'What is your occupation?' you shall answer, 'Your servants have been breeders of livestock from the start until now, both we and our fathers. So that we may stay in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are abhorred in Egypt, to Egyptians, abhorrent to Egyptians.'"
Right. So better to be a breeder than a shepherd. But the brothers, as was mentioned earlier, they just end up disregarding this suggestion, and we'll see that coming up. Ben, you want to go on?
Okay. Then Joseph came and reported to Pharaoh, saying, "My father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that is theirs, have come from the land of Canaan and are now in the region of Goshen." And selecting a few of his brothers, he presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" They answered Pharaoh, "We, your servants, are shepherds, as were also our fathers. We have come," they told Pharaoh, "to sojourn in this land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, the famine being severe in the land of Canaan. Pray then, let your servants stay in the region of Goshen." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "As regards your father and your brothers who have come to you, the land of Egypt is open for you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them stay in the region of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." Joseph then brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob greeted Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked Jacob, "How many are the years of your life?" And Jacob answered Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourn on earth are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life, nor do they come up to the lifespans of my fathers during their sojourns." Then Jacob bade Pharaoh farewell and left Pharaoh's presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the choicest part of the land of Egypt, in the region of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread down to the little ones. Now there was no bread in the world, for the famine was very severe. Both the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph gathered in all the money that was to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan as payment for the rations that were being procured. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's palace. And when the money gave out in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, lest we die before your very eyes, for the money is gone." And Joseph said, "Bring your livestock, and I will sell to you against your livestock, if the money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, for the stocks of sheep and cattle, and the asses. Thus he provided them with bread that year in exchange for all their livestock. And when that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We cannot hide from my lord that with all the money and animal stocks consigned to my lord, nothing is left at my lord's disposal save our persons and our family and our farmland. Let us not perish before your eyes, both we and our land. Take us and our land in exchange for bread, and we with our land will be serfs to Pharaoh. Provide the seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become a waste." So Joseph gained possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Pharaoh, every Egyptian having sold his land because the famine was too much for them. Thus the land passed over to Pharaoh. And he removed the population town by town from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not take over, for the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the allotment which Pharaoh had made to them. Therefore they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Whereas I have this day acquired you and your land for Pharaoh, here is seed for you to sow the land. And when the harvest comes, you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be yours as seed for the fields, and as food for you and those in your households, as your nourishment for your children." And they said, "You have saved our lives. We are grateful to my Lord, and we shall be serfs to Pharaoh." And Joseph made it into a land law in Egypt, which is still valid, that 1/5 should be Pharaoh's, only the land of priests should not become Pharaoh's. Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the region of Goshen. They acquired holdings in it and were fertile and increased greatly.
So there's two interesting things in here. I mean, there's probably more than two, but two interesting things that are in here. One is each time that Joseph is doling things out, he's selling them bread. Right? I think that for me, probably for most people, what do we think about is that he's collected all of the grain, and they come and they ask for grain, and that's what he's giving out. But here they've got it, at least in the language of the text, that he's selling them bread. So I'm not sure that bread is the only thing that people would have done with grain at that point. They probably would have made other things as well. So why that limitation on it as opposed to just selling them grain was one. And then the second is, and this is going to take us to some of the last texts that we have on the source sheet. In verse 19, it says, they're saying to him, "Let us not perish. Take us and our land in exchange for bread." And then they say, "Provide the seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become a waste." So why do they want seed if they're still in the middle of a famine, right?
Yeah.
Right? Unless more time has passed, we're only about 2 years into the famine. And so Rashi looks at that a little bit, and then the Kedusha Levi after him. Rashi says, "Give us seed to sow in the ground." Although Joseph had said, "And there are yet 5 years when there will be no plowing and sowing," as soon as Jacob came to Egypt, a blessing came with his arrival. They began to sow, and the famine came to an end. Thus do we read in the Tosefta of Sota. So, George, you were saying before, right, that the Pharaoh's got to have faith that this famine's going to last for another 5 years, right? And it seems in the rabbinic understanding that when Jacob comes down, Jacob and the family come down, the famine subsides, right? And they're able to start growing things again. Is that connected to, sort of a protection, if you will, or divine protection of the family? If you say that, well, then why wasn't there that divine protection in Canaan, right? So we don't really know, but it does seem strange that people have any interest in having seed when they expect that for another 5 years they're not going to be able to grow anything.
Well, they've been given bread. They eat the provisions that they have and
Right.
save the seed for 3 years later.
Okay, right. Could be that they're looking to the future as well. That yes, we're buying bread, but we also need to start gathering up seed. It's sort of like people that have bunkers or whatever else, right? That have lots of provisions for when it's necessary in the future. But there's also the idea that there's stockpiles of seed some places to be able to use when that is necessary as well. So then Kedusha Levi looks at that as well. Susan, were you reading? Did you read yet?
No.
Okay, yeah, number 7.
Genesis 47:19, and provide us with seed so that we may live and not die. See Rashi's commentary on this verse, who explains that since the arrival of Yaakov in Egypt and his blessing, the people had begun to sow seed again, although the famine had not predicted to last for 7 years.
Had been predicted.
The famine had been predicted to last for 7 years. Compare also the answer to the question of Nachmanides, how Yaakov was able to annul an interpretation given by his son of Pharaoh's dream, according to which the famine would last for 7 years. After all, Joseph had spoken in the name of God when he had told Pharaoh. God had revealed to Pharaoh that which he is about to do. Joseph had implied that no tzaddik could interfere with this decree of God, although the Talmud in Moed Katan 16 told us of the ability of the tzaddik through his prayer to bring about a cancellation of harmful decrees. We must answer that what Joseph had told Pharaoh at that time concerned the existing circumstances when there is no tzaddik in Egypt whose prayer could influence God to rescind part of all of his decree. With the arrival of Joseph's father in Egypt, circumstances had changed, as there now was a tzaddik of sufficient caliber to bring about a cessation of this decree. That is why Joseph could hand out seed, and this was not a waste.
So again, we could ask, well, why wasn't the tzaddik, Jacob, able to change it back in Canaan? Possibly we could say that he didn't know at that point that it was a decree of God. You could say, well, everything they sort of attribute it to a divine hand, but it not in the sense of, well, there had been this dream and 7 years and 7 years. So he didn't know to act in that way. And now here he is, and he's sort of got the whole picture. And the tzaddik, while we spoke of Joseph as a tzaddik before, having gone down to Egypt and retained his faith, his tradition, and so forth, the real tzaddik in the picture is Jacob. And again, we see that by God speaking to Jacob, right? As he's going to make this travel to Canaan, the first thing that happens when they pause in Beersheba is God comes back out and speaks again, which had been completely absent, right? You'd think, the whole sitting in the pit, sitting in the dungeon, right? There would have been something saying, Joseph, don't worry about it. Things are going to be okay, right? If it had traveled some of the same trajectories as past stories of our ancestors, God would have been there with Joseph. But it's really this relationship with Jacob that's unique. And we end the section in a very telling way. Thus Israel settled in the country of Egypt, in the region of Goshen. And there's always that, I don't want to say confusion, but that mixture. When we're talking about Israel, are we talking about Jacob, or are we talking about the whole family, right? And it could be, it's both, right? It sort of leaves that book open. And so Jacob certainly has an esteemed place within the tradition here, and can thus bring about the ending of the famine earlier than it was supposed to be. Thank you.
Does the transition to serfdom apply to the Jacob's family, the Egyptians, or everyone?
It's interesting. So I think that in our tradition, at least, the question was the question is, does the idea of serfdom transition to the Israelites as well? They seem to have at least at this time, right? They seem to have a higher place than the others because of their connection to Joseph. But what's happened is Joseph's really consolidated all the wealth of Egypt and of the surrounding areas into Pharaoh's control. And that then plays out a little bit later on as well. But they certainly have the market on the whole region there at that point. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful new year, and we'll see you in 2020.
Later.